Hi everyone. The body of nature incorporating human form is our focus for this week in Year 9 photography. And I think it's about time that where we study nature, we also consider that through that study of nature, we might also be studying the human form as well. I asked my class, did they believe themselves to be separate from nature? And I was really amazed by the responses. There were some that clearly identified themselves as being part of nature, yet there were others who saw themselves as totally separate. And I wonder about whether this separation between nature and humans is actually what causes a lot of our problems in terms of how we respond to our environment and how we think of the natural world. I think we're much less likely, for example, to be cruel to the body in which we live if we believe we are part of it. So this time we're going to be looking at a Lithuanian photographer, a contemporary photographer called Viktorija Stapone, or Stapone, I'm not sure how to say it. And you can see on the screen now some of her photographs. She does often shoot in colour, and she does photograph things that are almost kind of fantastical sometimes, yet still rooted in the natural world. And you can see on the screen as well a quote from her from one of her many kind of comments on the internet, that she said that all this natural habitat around me nurtured a wild imagination and the ability to see things deeper than the average human eye. Now, when we think about that as a quote about really the whole of nature, we see someone who, yes, uses nature to her advantage as a photographer, but again also believes herself to be somehow part of nature, not just connected to it, part of it. Her imagination is tied in with nature. And if we think about the visual qualities, even in the middle image, the model with the long hair, although there's not necessarily something that seems mystical or mythical about it, we can see something through that muted colour palette, for example, that takes us almost like to another realm. The fact that the model is partially concealed behind that giant leaf, the fact that there's a playfulness with the eye peeping through that hole in the leaf, the fact that we can see the kind of texture of the model's skin as much as we can see the texture of the leaf. These are things about relationships and correlations between that human form and the other natural forms within the frame. Another quote that I think is pertinent here is that she's written, "We are like plants growing, emanating from the leaves and flowers." And when we look at the photograph on the screen now, we see the model truly emerging, or if not emerging, then it's even as if she's kind of living as part of the plant. She's so immersed in that shape space. And things like the detail of the hair, for example, echoing the lines of the veins in the leaves. Again, these relationships, these visual relationships between what is photographed in the human and what is photographed in nature, in the plant or the flowers. And it says there, through the use of photographic portraiture, Stapone reveals the human form through nature and vice versa. So there's a reciprocity between nature and the human. But I do wonder if there's an exchange between the nature and the human. It doesn't seem like this human owes anything to nature, nor does nature owe anything to the human. It simply seems that they are in existence with each other. It goes on to say there, this is depicted through the portrayed characters and their interaction with the landscape. In her body of work, the human form is visually connected to the wilderness and often even completes the body form through line and shape. And if you ever look for Stapone online, you will see lots of very kind of filmic narrative style photographs where the human character within the frame somehow extends, for example, a branch through an arm, or A flash of colour is juxtaposed with something that is otherwise bleak, nonetheless making it an intrinsic part of the nature it sits within. And so for me, what is important as a photographer, if I'm going to take inspiration from Stapone and think about my place within nature, that of course I don't just have nature as a background to me, that I don't just use nature as a means of beautifying or deifying myself as a human, but that I'm actually immersed in nature. And so on the screen there you can see the examples going through from my initial setup, which is just on my kitchen table, some black fabric with 3 little pots of ferns. You can see an original image, what I shot, where I pushed my hand up through the gap between the ferns and didn't make my hand seem particularly separate from those leaf shapes. And then on the far side, over on the left, you can see how I altered the image post-production to try and match in with the visual values I've seen in Stapone's work. That means reducing the saturation of the colour, enhancing the colour temperature so that my skin tone doesn't become completely cadaverous and dead seeming, and also making sure that where the colours become faded or bleached out a little, that there's still a quality and depth of tone, so I go back to black at the darkest points. And another example, the technical considerations are the same. I'm thinking about contrast, I'm thinking about colour temperature, brightness, saturation, and also sharpness. Thinking about sharpness in the frame, I was photographing my own hands. My hands are middle-aged hands, but still I increased the sharpness so that any line or wrinkle is emphasised. And that for me very much is about keeping with the sense that the ferns have a textural quality that I want to try and transfer over into my own human form. And I want us to consider, are photographs of nature more or less powerful with the inclusion of human form? That's a very challenging question, because as artists we are making manifest and permanent the world we see around us. As visual artists we can only ever seek to represent what we see through what others will see in our end product of whatever we create. With the inclusion of the human form, are we simply making nature our kind of like the supporting cast to us as the main event? Is nature a co-conspirator, or simply are we the same? Is there no need to separate out the human form from the plant form? Is there no need to actually separate out the flower head from the fingernail or whatever it might be? And in a discussion of the answers you might come up with for that kind of question, perhaps there's also a sense of how you feel more broadly about nature and whether we care for it as something external to ourselves, whether we ignore it, hope for the best with it, doesn't bother us, doesn't affect us, or whether we believe ourselves actually to be part of it, that our vitality is the vitality of nature. And that links back also to an artist we studied in another presentation, that was Keith Dotson, and his ideas about environmentalism, his return time and time again to the beauty of nature without the necessity of him, the man, the human, the photographer, stamping anything on that nature, controlling that nature in any way other than simply to capture it for others to see. Now, Stapone is different to that, in that through her use of human form, she is inviting us to understand our own bodies, our own beings as part of the narrative of nature in a more obvious way. But I do wonder if they're actually doing the same thing. They're making us see the same thing through beauty, through photographs. I also chose to look at one of my photographs is black and white. That's because I wanted to try and make sure I was pitching my tonal ranges within the same tonal ranges we might see in Stapone's work. So this example again. And what I want to think students who are recreating this work will do is to make sure that even though there might be an elevation of contrast, that there's no loss of levels within the greys. So there's still a lovely soft undulation of greys that really encounters the whole spectrum. It creates a wide range of tones. Again, going back to that idea that your lightest brights could be white or completely bright, certainly that your darkest areas are totally black. And then the task as it is, I'll read it exactly as I've written it. We're thinking that you're going to create PowerPoint again so I can see it when we're still in lockdown and not together in class. I want you to make a series of 4 photographs in the style of Viktorija Stapone. I want you to play with emerging human forms amongst natural forms, creating strong contrast between light and dark, paring back the midtones into flat levels so we get those lovely greys, very soft, with a high colour temperature but a low saturation. So that's where you're taking out the intensity of the colour, but you're making the colour warmer. And I also want you to write a biographical slide in which you analyse Stapone's work in context of nature, climate change and environmentalism. These are things that are going to set you up to really think about why you take the photographs you do. It's not just for a GCSE or an A-Level, it's because you're photographers, but why do you take these photographs as a photographer? Is it because you want to make a comment on how you feel about nature? And again, in another presentation, I've said it and I'll say it again now, there's never been a more pertinent time, important time, for us to really evaluate what we think about nature, how we feel about nature and the planet. And then for stretch and challenge, there are lots of you in the class who want more to do. I'd like you to compare Stapone's work to Keith Dotson's photographs. Are they both leading us to the same conclusions? And I want you to write your response on the final slide explaining your answer. So, good luck. I look forward to seeing beautiful work. And I'm particularly interested to know whether you believe yourself to be separate to or part of nature.